Every summer, a plane climbs over the mountains of Utah, opens its hatch, and thousands of trout fingerlings fly into the water below. One flight, one lake. This year alone, 11.6 million fingerlings. And this has been repeating for 70 years now. But the lakes that people considered dead and empty for decades weren't empty at all. What had lived there for 10,000 years before the first trout has now nearly disappeared. What exactly lived there, and why did nobody notice? The Uinta Mountains in Utah. Over 650 lakes above the tree line. No road leads to them. 10,000 years ago, the glaciers melted, leaving behind a bowl of bedrock filled with meltwater and nothing else. Not a single fish or predator with scales and fins. Frogs, salamanders, insect larvae, and tiny zooplankton moved into these empty lakes. For 10,000 years, they lived without a single enemy that could outswim them. Then people arrived with a dream of fish in every puddle. Before the airplane, horses carried the fish to the lakes. A biologist with a pack train would stop at a stream, open milk cans strapped to the animal's sides, and change the water. The neck of the can was tied off with burlap, since a regular lid couldn't hold water steady while moving. Every step the horse took sloshed the water in the can. That was the aeration system. A week of travel through the mountains one way and only enough for a few lakes at a time. And the Uinta Mountains alone hold more than 650 of them. Utah's own Division of Wildlife Resources admits openly that nobody recorded the exact date or the name of the first person who tried dropping fish from a plane. The first confirmed year of the program is 1956. Not a single hero with an idea, but a state that had simply run up against the limits of the old method. The scale of the problem was straightforward. Getting fish by pack horse to every remote lake required weeks of travel each summer, dozens of people and horses, and a result that depended on the weather on the mountain trail just as much as the weather at the lake itself. A single hatchery couldn't supply fish faster than horses could carry them there alive, and the state had hundreds of lakes that no road reached. The plane solved the math of the problem outright. One flight replaced several days of horse travel. One pilot could cover in a morning what a pack train spent a week on. The method didn't settle on one form right away. In 1965, 9 years after the first plane flights, Utah's Division of Fish and Game tried another approach: helicopters. Fingerlings were placed in plastic bags roughly 50 by 60 centimeters, filled with water and oxygen, like a packed aquarium ready for transport. The helicopter carried the bags to the lake and simply emptied them into the water. The experiment showed what every such attempt tends to show. Helicopters cost more than planes and burn more fuel per volume of fish moved. The plane remained the primary method. The helicopter found its niche only where the mountains are lower and flying is simpler, as later happened in New York's Adirondacks. By the late 1960s, aerial fish stocking had become, in Utah, not an experiment but a habit. What had started as an attempt by a pilot history never bothered to record had turned into an annual ritual that hasn't skipped a single year in 70 years. For 70 years, this sounded like a triumph of people over geography. Lakes with no roads finally got fish. Except these lakes weren't waiting for anglers. They were waiting for a predator that had never been there at all. The lakes where the first trout landed put up no fight whatsoever. There was no pike, no bass, nothing that knew how to hunt in water. For 5,000 years, fish had been a theoretical possibility there that never happened. And now it fell from the sky, ready to eat anything that moved. This wasn't about the boreal toad you might know from elsewhere. In these mountains, fish met a different species entirely, the boreal chorus frog. Body length 7 to 8 centimeters, dark spots on the belly, a white stripe down the back. It laid its eggs right in the shallow water of bogs and lakes, the very same water where trout now arrived with an appetite and no natural limits at all. Today, the boreal chorus frog population across the southern Rocky Mountain region, which includes Utah, has shrunk to 1% of its former breeding range. 1%. Trout aren't the only cause. A chytrid fungus that destroys amphibian skin has killed more frogs than any fish has. This fungus isn't native either. It most likely originated on the Korean peninsula and spread around the world along the same pathway as trout, through trade, through people carrying live animals to places that had never been waiting for them. The fungus invades the frog's skin, which the animal breathes through almost as much as through its lungs. When the skin breaks down, the salt balance in the blood goes haywire, and the heart simply stops. But where the fungus hasn't yet arrived, trout finish the job on their own, eating the eggs, eating the larvae, before they ever grow into something capable of hiding. The lakes people called dead were never dead. They were simply home to creatures that couldn't outswim a predator that hadn't been brought there yet. That didn't stop the program. The planes kept flying, and they still do. Trout versus frogs isn't the only fight this program set off. The golden trout, bright gold with red spots, native only to the southern Sierra Nevada and California, became a desired trophy fish for the Uinta Lakes too, back in the 1920s. Utah hauled it up there for decades. In the 1950s, brook trout, another introduced species but a far more aggressive one, started showing up in the same lakes. The golden trout couldn't compete. One population after another disappeared. Utah tried to fix this with new batches of golden trout in the 1960s and the 1970s. The result was the same every time. Brook trout always won. Today, golden trout survive in exactly 2 stretches of the high Uintas. In 2012, after years with no new stocking, the Division of Wildlife Resources worked out a deal with Wyoming's fish department for eggs and restarted stocking a species the program itself had once nearly wiped out. It's the same plane, the same technology, the same 7-compartment tank. Only now the goal isn't to fill an empty lake, it's to keep a dwindling species from disappearing entirely. But most people never encountered this program through the golden trout or the frogs. They encountered it through video. In 2013, Ted Hallows strapped a cheap GoPro to the bottom of a plane just to see what it looked like from the outside. The video spread across the internet. Millions of views, comments calling it the best job in the world. Nobody watching the rain of trout falling over mirror-still water asked what happened to the lake after the camera turned off. The process itself looks simple. The plane flies over the forest, the hatch opens, water full of fish falls down. But behind that simplicity is a precisely calibrated system. The water is kept cold, the fish aren't fed before the flight, and each of the tank's 7 compartments is assigned to a different lake. One flight, 35,000 fingerlings, no refueling needed. 40 to 60 lakes in a single morning. People on the ground almost never hear the actual moment of release. The engine drowns everything out, but those who have managed to stand on a lakeshore right as the hatch opens all describe the same thing. The sound carrying over the water is the sound of rain. Before the fish ever see the sky, they spend months growing in hatchery pools, in water kept a few degrees colder than the lake water, so the fingerlings don't feel a sudden shift during transfer. Biologists weigh out batches down to the gram. Too much fish in one tank compartment, and there won't be enough oxygen even for a short flight. The truck carrying the tanks heads to the airfield before sunrise because warm daytime air in the truck bed is one more source of stress that can only be eliminated through speed. Every detail of that morning exists for one purpose, so that fish spending less than a minute in the air land alive. The fingerlings measure 3 to 5 centimeters long, small enough that air resistance slows their fall. They don't slam into the water, they more or less plop in. 95% survive a drop from a height that would certainly kill a person. The program doesn't draw a single dollar from the state budget. Every cent comes from fishing license sales. Anglers pay for the fish they'll later catch themselves. Why does this happen every year instead of just once? Utah's mountain lakes freeze almost to the bottom every winter. The ice seals off the water, oxygen runs out, and fish that haven't made it down to deeper water die right where they are. A lake full of trout in August can be empty by spring. This is called winter kill. Every spring brings a new flight, because the fish from last summer may simply no longer exist. The deepest of these lakes hold only a few meters of water inside a bowl of bedrock. In winter, ice can take up most of that depth, leaving the fish a strip of water just a few dozen centimeters deep, where oxygen runs out faster than the sun can melt the surface come spring. Lakes on higher ridges freeze earlier and thaw later than those lower down, and they're the ones that lose their fish most often. The same cycle, every year. The plane flies, the fish fall, the fish die under the ice, and next summer it all happens again. This program isn't unique to Utah. At least 10 states run something similar. The method was born in California in the mid-1940s when pilots returning from the war brought home a skill for low-altitude flying and a wish to use it somewhere it wouldn't kill anyone. The lead pilot behind the program had flown a B-24 heavy bomber over the Pacific. Now he was dropping trout fingerlings instead of bombs. In Alaska, Colorado, and Oregon, fish fly for the same reasons: mountains, no roads, no other way in. In New York, where the highest peak in the Adirondacks reaches only about 1,600 meters, modest by Western standards, the program uses helicopters instead of planes. In winter and spring, fish are carried to tributaries and ponds as yearlings, ready to hold their own in the water right away. In fall, when flying conditions allow planes to join in too, the fingerlings delivered are slightly larger, meant to finish growing in the wild. Most of the fish stocked in that region are a hybrid bred specifically for the more acidic waters of the Adirondacks, since ordinary brook trout simply can't survive there. The helicopters used in New York are sometimes the very same ones that carry the state governor, the same fleet, the same pilots, just a different cargo. 10 states, the same method, the same reason: water no road can reach. Some lakes elsewhere in the mountains went through a different kind of experiment, removing the fish entirely. Electroshock equipment, nets, sometimes a chemical treatment. Biologists cleared the water of everything that swims and eats. In lakes where trout were removed completely, amphibians began coming back within 2 to 5 years. After a few seasons, a body of water that hadn't seen frog eggs in decades filled up again with animals that had been waiting their turn just below the surface, in neighboring bogs, in the memory of an ecosystem that hadn't forgotten what it was like to live without a predator. Biologists who've tracked these cases for years describe it with something close to disbelief. A lake considered permanently altered starts croaking again within a season or two of the fish being removed. Larvae that hadn't been seen there in decades appeared within the first warm months. This points to one conclusion: the damage trout cause isn't permanent. It reverses faster than anyone expected. That's the single most important finding from decades of research into aerial fish stocking. Not that fish cause harm, but that removing them almost always works. But that only holds where the fish are removed for good. And where the program keeps running, which it does across most of the mountain lakes of the American West, that balance never arrives. A lake can't simultaneously serve as a refuge for a vanishing species and a yearly target for a fresh batch of trout. Today, most of the fish dropped from planes are sterile, specifically bred so they can't reproduce in the wild. The trout are there, and anglers catch them, but they don't spread into new territory on their own. It's a compromise between a program that will keep running as long as there's demand for fishing, and an ecosystem no longer facing uncontrolled spread of a new species. Does that solve the problem? No. Sterile trout still eat frog eggs the same summer they're dropped in. They still compete with zooplankton for food. They still live in the lake until they die under the ice. This is management of damage that has already happened, and keeps repeating every year, because ending the program would cut off hundreds of thousands of anglers from the lakes that an entire mountain summer culture is built around. Ted Hallows doesn't resolve this contradiction. He just keeps flying. Every summer, he coordinates aerial stalking across Utah, from the Uintas to the Lossals. Every summer, the plane climbs and fish fall like a rain nobody ordered but everybody waits for. This year, 11.6 million fish dropped into Utah's lakes and reservoirs, fewer than last year's 12.8 million. Because the state's population could double by 2050, while the number of hatcheries and the amount of available water won't. The Division of Wildlife Resources has just put together a 30-year plan for how to allocate fish that will never be enough for everyone who wants to cast a line. Part of that plan is already under construction. In the town of Loa, a new hatchery is being built, replacing one that closed in 2014 after an invasive snail got in, most likely carried there on someone's gear or in someone's aquarium. The new hatchery is meant to produce twice as much fish as the old one, fed by the same cold springs that supplied it for decades. Fishing brings Utah more than $1 billion a year and supports 8,000 jobs. That's the scale any decision about frogs has to compete against. That same plan includes, for the first time, a line item for the western chorus frog. The same state that spent 70 years dropping trout into water where frogs lived is now starting to raise those same frogs in those same hatcheries to keep them off the endangered species list. Nobody is planning to stop aerial fish stocking in Utah. Too many anglers, too much revenue at stake. But for the first time in 70 years, the same machine that caused the damage has started working in the other direction too. A rain of trout over mirror-still water, a great video for social media, and a frog that's no longer there might finally get a chance to find out why and whether it gets to come back too.